It starts as a faint, barely perceptible sound, a gentle scratching, like the restless scurrying of tiny feet somewhere above the ceiling. At first, you dismiss it as a trick of the wind, or perhaps the old building groaning under its own weight. But as the days pass, the noises persist, growing steadily bolder, creeping into the quiet hours of the night with an uncanny regularity. You try to ignore it, pressing your pillow over your ears, telling yourself it's just mice or some wayward branch scraping against the rooftop. Yet deep down, you know it's not that simple. You remember the stories about the apartment upstairs, the faded number on the door, the peeling paint, the tarnished brass knob that no one has turned in years. The landlord always changes the subject when you ask about it, insisting the unit is sealed, uninhabited, waiting for renovations that never seem to come. But you've seen no workers, no tools, no sign of life, except for the noises that start each night as the building settles into silence. The scratching becomes your constant companion. It weaves itself into your daily routine, a subtle soundtrack to your mornings and evenings. Sometimes it's a slow, deliberate scrape. Other times, a frantic, erratic skitter. At first, you try to rationalize it. Maybe squirrels, or a bird trapped in the attic. Maybe pipes expanding and contracting with the change of weather. These explanations bring comfort, but only for a little while. One night, the sounds shift. Instead of the usual scratching, you hear a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming on wood. It travels from one corner of the ceiling to the other, pausing now and then, as if listening for your reaction. Heart pounding, you lie motionless in bed, ears straining to catch every nuance. The tapping continues, steady and patient, until you finally drift into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, you can't shake the feeling of being watched. You glance up at the ceiling, half expecting to see cracks, or stains, or some sign of intrusion. But everything appears unchanged. Just the same old faded paint, the same shadows dancing across the plaster. Still, the sense of unease lingers, following you as you make your coffee, as you get ready for work. You start to ask your neighbors if they've heard anything strange. Some shrug and laugh it off, chalking it up to the quirks of an old building. Others grow quiet, their eyes darting nervously toward the stairwell. One elderly woman on the third floor tells you, in a hushed voice, that the apartment above you has always been different. People move in, but they never stay long, she whispers. Something about that place, it doesn't let you rest. That night, the scratching resumes, louder and more insistent than ever. It sounds almost purposeful, as if someone, or something, is trying to communicate. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, your mind racing with possibilities. Is it possible that someone is actually living up there, hiding from the world? Or is there something else, something that defies explanation? Weeks pass, and the activity intensifies. The noises begin earlier in the evening, sometimes continuing well into the dawn. You hear footsteps pacing back and forth, the creak of floorboards, the soft thud of something heavy being dragged across the room. One evening, as you're brushing your teeth, you hear what sounds like muffled voices, whispers just beyond the edge of comprehension. You strain to make out the words, but they fade away as quickly as they came. Sleep becomes a rare commodity. You find yourself growing irritable, jumpy, your nerves fraying at the edges. The once familiar contours of your apartment begin to feel alien, as if you're living in someone else's space. Some nights you catch yourself standing in the hallway, staring up at the ceiling, willing the noises to stop. But they never do. Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, you decide to investigate. One afternoon, you climb the worn staircase to the floor above, heart pounding in your chest. The hallway is silent, bathed in the sickly glow of a single flickering bulb. The door to the vacant apartment looms before you, its surface scarred and weathered by time. You reach out, hesitating for a moment before knocking softly. The sound echoes down the empty corridor, but there's no response. You try the doorknob, but it's locked tight. Pressing your ear against the wood, you listen for any sign of movement inside. For a moment, there's nothing, just the dull thud of your own heartbeat. Then faintly, you hear the scratching, a slow, deliberate sound moving closer to the door. You jerk back, a chill running down your spine. You return to your apartment, unsettled. That night, the noises are louder than ever, as if your visit has stirred something awake. The scratching becomes frantic, desperate, accompanied by the sound of something clawing against the floorboards. You lie in bed, paralyzed by fear, listening as the sounds move from one end of the ceiling to the other, always returning to the spot directly above your head. Desperation gives way to obsession. You research the building's history, searching for any clue that might explain the phenomena. Buried in old newspaper archives, you find a brief mention of a tragedy, a tenant who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a locked room and unanswered questions. The case was never solved, the apartment sealed ever since. Armed with this knowledge, you confront the landlord, demanding answers. He sighs, weariness etched into his features, and finally admits what you suspected all along. That apartment, it's better left alone, he says. Some places carry memories, some memories never sleep. You move through your days in a haze, the line between waking and dreaming growing ever thinner. The sounds above never cease. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, you think you hear your own name whispered from the darkness. You try to ignore it, to convince yourself it's just your imagination, but the certainty grows. You are not alone. In time, you learn to live with the noises, accepting them as part of your world. They become a strange comfort, a reminder that the past is never truly gone. The neighbor who never sleeps remains ever present, watching, waiting, scratching at the edges of your reality. You wonder sometimes what would happen if you answered the call, if you opened the door and let whatever waits above into your life. For now, you choose to remain below, listening to the sounds in the darkness, and hoping that the boundary between your world and theirs will hold, at least for another night. There is something inherently unsettling about routine, especially when that routine isn't your own. Every night at precisely 3 a.m., the world seems to pause. Neither the end of yesterday nor the beginning of today. It's a time when most people are folded in sleep. The city's heartbeats soften to a whisper, and what stirs in the shadows does so unseen. For one tenant, this hour would become the centerpiece of their life, illuminated not by daylight, but by the pale, unblinking eye of a hallway camera. It started innocuously enough. The building's management had recently upgraded the security system. New digital locks, brighter motion-activated lights, and a web portal for tenants to view the hallway feed outside their door. It was a comfort at first, a modern reassurance in an old building. The tenant, someone who often worked late and returned home while the city was already asleep, found solace in the knowledge that they could check the camera before stepping into the corridor. One sleepless night, restless from a half-remembered dream, the tenant found themselves awake at 2:53 a.m. The silence in the apartment was absolute. Driven by nothing but idle curiosity, they opened the security app on their phone and tapped into the feed. The hallway, narrow and carpeted in tired burgundy, was empty save for the familiar rows of apartment doors and the occasional scuff mark on the wall. The tenant watched for a moment, then set the phone aside, ready to drift back into sleep. But some faint unease, kept them awake. They glanced again at the clock. 3 a.m. came and went. They watched the feed, almost daring something to happen. Nothing did. Eventually they succumbed to sleep. The habit formed quickly. Each night as the clock crept toward 3, the tenant would check the feed. The hallway was always the same, silent, still, harmless. Until one night it wasn't. At first it was a flicker, a brief movement that could have been a trick of the camera. The tenant blinked, leaned closer, and saw a figure standing just outside their door. The person was tall and unmoving, their features blurred by the grainy night vision. They neither knocked nor made a sound. They simply stood, facing the door, as if listening for movement within. The tenant froze, heart hammering in their chest. They waited, breathless, fingers poised to call for help. But after a minute, maybe less, maybe more, the figure turned and walked away, vanishing down the hallway. The tenant scrolled back through the footage, watching the scene unfold in reverse. There was no sign of how the person had arrived, no sound to mark their coming or going. Sleep was impossible after that. Dawn crept in, gray and thin, and the tenants sat upright in bed, phone clutched tight in their hands. When the city came back to life, they called the building manager, who promised to review the tapes and alert security. The manager was polite but unconcerned. "Sometimes you get people lost, or up late, or maybe a neighbor with the wrong door," they said. "We'll keep an eye on it, but let me know if it happens again." The next night, the tenant watched the feed with dread, and again, at 3 a.m., the figure appeared, exactly as before. Same posture, same silence. This time, the tenant noticed more. The person wore dark clothing, a hood pulled up, hands tucked into pockets. The camera's angle caught only the side of their face, indistinct but unmistakably human. Again, they left without a sound. The tenant began to track the incidents, noting the time, the duration, the figure's posture. Each night, the stranger appeared, stood at the door for a minute or two, and then vanished. They never knocked, never tried the handle, never made a sound that could be heard through the door. Yet the certainty of their presence was impossible to ignore. Days became colored by the anticipation of the night. The tenant found themselves jumping at creaks and footsteps, glancing at the peephole before moving through their apartment. Conversations with neighbors brought no answers. No one else seemed to notice anything strange. The hallway, when seen in daylight, was just a hallway. Small, unremarkable, with doors that all looked the same. The building manager was sympathetic but skeptical. They reviewed the tapes and admitted, yes, someone was there. But the footage was too grainy to make out any distinguishing features. The police were called, but with no crime committed, they filed a report and moved on. The tenant was advised to keep their door locked at all times and to call if anything escalated. But nothing ever did, at least not in any obvious way. The figure never tried to break in. They never left a note, never spoke, never made contact. Yet their presence was a violation, a silent intrusion that turned the tenant's home into a place of unease. The ritual of checking the camera became a nightly torment, a grim form of hope that, perhaps, this would be the night the visitor would not appear. But every night at 3 a.m. there they were, unwavering, patient, inscrutable. As the weeks passed, the tenant tried to reclaim their nights. They set alarms for different times, tried to sleep through the hour, even left the apartment for late walks to avoid the moment entirely. But it was no use. The knowledge of the figure's presence hovered in the air, a shadow that stretched across every waking moment. One morning, after a particularly restless night, the tenant decided to confront the mystery head-on. They positioned themselves by the door just before 3. In the heart of a bustling city, nestled among rows of ordinary apartment buildings, there stands a structure whose story has gradually woven itself into the fabric of local legend. At first glance, it appears no different from its neighbors. A facade of brick and glass, balconies adorned with potted plants, the soft glow of lamps behind drawn curtains. Yet, for decades, one unit within this building has drawn the anxious attention of those who live nearby. Its door is sealed, its windows perpetually curtained, and its secrets, it seems, are guarded as fiercely as the locks that keep the world out. Residents recall the day the landlord sealed the apartment, a day shrouded in whispers and hurried glances. No one seems to remember who lived there last, or why the unit was closed off so completely. Some claim it was following a string of disturbances, others murmur about an unexplained disappearance. The truth, as with so many urban mysteries, has been buried under layers of speculation and fear. Yet the passage of time has done little to quiet the building's persistent unease. For years, tenants have reported strange sounds emanating from behind the sealed door. At night, when the corridors are empty and the city's hum has faded to a distant murmur, cries pierce the silence. Anguished, desperate, unmistakably human. Sometimes the screams are accompanied by the sound of furniture crashing or frantic banging, as if someone inside is trying to break free. Initially, these stories were met with skepticism. Newcomers dismissed the accounts as overactive imaginations or the residue of old ghost stories. But as the months turned into years, and the reports only grew more frequent and intense, even the most rational among the residents were forced to confront the possibility that something was terribly wrong within those 4 walls. In recent times, the voices of concern have become louder. Residents in cities across the country, from West Hollywood, California to Boston, Massachusetts, have faced similar disturbances, raising crucial questions about safety, maintenance, and the responsibilities of those who manage these aging buildings. In West Hollywood, for instance, neighbors have endured months of chaos from a particularly troubled apartment. Loud banging, the sound of furniture being smashed, and above all, persistent cries for help. Despite repeated calls to police, authorities have maintained that without clear evidence of physical harm, their hands are tied. The landlord, in response, has moved to evict the tenant. But as of March 2025, the situation remains unresolved, leaving residents in a state of dread and uncertainty. These incidents are not isolated. In Boston's Ruth Barclay apartments, elevator breakdowns have left tenants trapped, their pleas for help echoing down the hallways. The city's housing authority has since allocated $6 million for a complete overhaul of the elevators, an effort that speaks to the urgent need for robust maintenance and timely intervention. The work, expected to conclude soon, stands as a testament to the impact that neglected infrastructure can have on the safety and well-being of those who call these buildings home. Against this backdrop, the mystery of the locked apartment takes on new, sharper significance. It is no longer simply a tale of ghosts or urban legends, but a reflection of real and pressing concerns. When residents report hearing screams, when they speak of their fear and frustration, they are not just conjuring specters, they are highlighting the very tangible consequences of inaction and neglect. For those living in the building, the presence of the sealed unit has shaped daily life in subtle yet profound ways. Some avoid the corridor entirely, unwilling to risk an encounter with the unknown. Others have taken to leaving notes for the landlord, requesting updates or demanding action. But their pleas have, more often than not, gone unanswered. A few have even organized neighborhood meetings, pooling their experiences and seeking solidarity and shared anxiety. As word of the situation has spread, the building has become a focal point for local media and community advocates. Journalists have pieced together timelines of complaints, police records, and property management responses, painting a picture of a system under strain, one in which the voices of residents are too often drowned out by red tape and procedural delays. Yet, amidst the frustration, there have been glimmers of hope. The increased scrutiny has led some landlords to reconsider their approach, investing in better security measures and more responsive maintenance teams. In cities like Boston, the allocation of significant funds for infrastructure repairs signals a growing recognition that the safety of tenants must be a priority, not an afterthought. Still, for those who wake at night to the sound of screams or pass by the sealed door on their way to and from home, the fear remains as palpable as ever. The question that lingers is not just what happened in that apartment all those years ago, but what might still be happening within its walls. Is it possible that someone, or something, is still trapped inside, calling out for help that never comes? Or is the unit merely a vessel for the anxieties and traumas of a community grappling with uncertainty and change? Whatever the truth, the sealed apartment stands as a powerful reminder of our collective responsibility to one another. It asks us to listen, to the cries for help, to the concerns of our neighbors, to the warning signs that something is amiss. It challenges landlords, property managers, and public officials to act swiftly and decisively when confronted with reports of danger or distress. And it urges all of us to recognize that behind every closed door, there may be a story that deserves to be heard. In the end, the mystery of the locked apartment is not just a tale of horror or suspense. It is a call to action, a demand that we do better, that we attend to the needs of the most vulnerable among us, and that we never allow silence, bureaucracy, or fear to stand in the way of safety and compassion. Whether or not the screams are ever explained, the lessons they offer are as real and urgent as the echo of a voice in the night refusing to be ignored. It begins with a faint sound in the darkness, a soft rhythmic tapping, barely louder than the pulse beating in your own ears. At first, it's easy to dismiss as the settling noises of an old building, the kind that lull you into a fragile peace in the small hours of the night. But tonight, something is different. The pattern is deliberate, insistent, as if someone, or something, is pacing above, tracing the narrow metal corridors just beyond the reach of the light. You lie still in your bed, the sheets pulled up around your shoulders, the blue glow of your phone screen now extinguished, leaving your senses sharper in the gloom. The ceiling vent, a square grid of metal painted white to match the rest of the room, stares down at you from its perch over the closet. It's always seemed innocuous, a simple vent for air to circulate. But tonight your eyes are drawn to it, your attention snared by the possibility of movement. The footsteps grow louder, the thudding now distinct, echoing in the hollow spaces between the walls. You hold your breath, counting the steps, your imagination conjuring images of small animals, perhaps raccoons or squirrels that found their way into the ductwork. But then, there is a pause. Silence, so thick it presses against your eardrums. And then, unmistakably, the soft scrape of metal against metal. The vent cover shudders. A cold wave of dread sweeps over you. There is no way an animal could manipulate the screws or push at the grate from the inside. The sound is purposeful, methodical. You glance around your room, searching for something, anything, to use as a weapon, but you're rooted to the spot, every muscle tense, fingers clenched in the sheets. From the darkness above, a shape materializes behind the vent's mesh. At first, it's little more than a shadow, but then you see it. Pale, slender fingers, too long to be human, curling around the slats. They probe, testing the metal, flexing with a strange, unnatural grace. The hand twists, the vent creaks, and for a moment you think it will hold. But then, with a sudden snap, the cover gives way, swinging open with a metallic groan that fills the room. You want to scream. The sound rises in your throat, but fear clamps it down. The hand reaches further, its skin ashen, veins pulsing beneath the surface. It gropes blindly, searching for purchase, stretching toward the top of the closet. Dust falls in a soft shower, settling on your clothes, drifting toward the carpet. You force yourself to move, sliding. Moving into a new apartment can be both exciting and a little nerve-wracking. The process is filled with anticipation, new rooms to fill with memories, unfamiliar streets to explore, and neighbors to meet. For the new tenant, the day began with the promise of a fresh start. Boxes lined the hallway, stacked with books, kitchenware, and mementos from another life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden patterns on the hardwood floor. The air, tinged with the scent of fresh paint, seemed to whisper possibilities. After a few hours of unpacking, the tenant decided to take a short break, stepping out into the dimly lit hallway. The corridor was quiet, almost hushed, as if holding its breath. It was there, as the tenant fumbled with a bag of trash, that a voice broke the silence. "Hello there?" came the greeting, warm and sincere. The neighbor, a middle-aged man with a welcoming smile and gentle eyes, introduced himself as Thomas from the apartment next door. His demeanor was earnest, his words thoughtful, and he seemed genuinely pleased to meet the new arrival. They spoke for a while about the building, about the weather, and about the best places nearby for coffee. Thomas mentioned the quirks of the old elevator, the sound of rain against the windows, and the community's annual potluck in the courtyard. He gave advice on avoiding the noisy radiators and recommended a hidden bakery around the corner. Throughout their conversation, Thomas radiated kindness, his laughter echoing down the hall. After the pleasant exchange, the tenant returned to unpacking, feeling reassured. It was comforting to know that there was a friendly neighbor nearby. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky and shadows stretched across the living room, the tenant decided to call the landlord to ask about utilities and maintenance. The conversation drifted from practical matters to the people in the building. Casually, the tenant mentioned meeting Thomas next door and how nice he seemed. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that lingered, heavy and unexpected. The landlord's voice, usually brisk and businesslike, softened into concern. "I'm not sure who you spoke to," she said, "but the apartment next door is still vacant. No one has rented it yet, and the keys are still with me." A chill settled over the tenant as uncertainty replaced the warmth of the earlier encounter. The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The friendly neighbor, Thomas, had seemed so real, so present, and yet the landlord's insistence was unwavering. The apartment next door was supposed to be empty. The tenant tried to reconcile the contradiction, searching for a reasonable explanation. Perhaps Thomas was a caretaker, or maybe he was a family member of the owner, stopping by to check on the place. But the landlord was adamant. No one should be in that apartment. It's been vacant for weeks. That night, shadows seemed to stretch longer across the walls. Every creak and groan of the old building took on new significance. The tenant replayed the conversation with Thomas, recalling the details. The kindness in his voice, the familiarity with the building, the suggestions for local shops. It all felt genuine, yet the mystery lingered. Curiosity overcame caution. The tenant knocked gently on the apartment next door, hoping for another encounter, another chance to make sense of things. The knock echoed through the hallway, but there was no reply. The silence was palpable, thick enough to feel. The door, marked by years of use, stood closed and impassive. No light seeped from beneath the threshold. No sounds of movement could be detected. The following morning brought a new resolve. The tenant decided to investigate further, hoping that daylight would banish the unsettling confusion. A glance through the peephole revealed only an empty hallway, the familiar pattern of worn carpet stretching toward the stairwell. On a whim, the tenant pressed an ear to the door of the vacant apartment, listening for any signs of life. Voices, footsteps, the faint hum of a radio. Nothing. Days passed, each one marked by an increasing sense of unease. The building itself seemed to have its own secrets, its own stories hidden behind closed doors. The tenant spoke to other residents in passing, mentioning Thomas in hopes of confirmation. Some shook their heads, others offered sympathetic smiles, but none recognized the name or description. The mystery began to weigh on the tenant's mind. Was Thomas a figment of imagination, conjured up by the loneliness and anxiety of moving? Was he a ghost, a remnant of the building's past, lingering in the corridors and rooms that had once been his home? Or was there a simpler explanation, one that eluded easy understanding? The tenant found themselves drawn to the vacant apartment, unable to let go of the brief connection they had felt. Each time they walked past, they remembered Thomas's words, the stories he had told, the advice he had given, the warmth of his welcome. It was as if the building itself was trying to speak, to share its history through glimpses and encounters. One afternoon, as the tenant passed by, they noticed something unusual. A slip of paper wedged beneath the door of the vacant apartment. Picking it up, they found a handwritten note, the ink faded but legible. "Welcome to your new home. If you ever need anything, just knock. Thomas." The discovery sent a shiver down the tenant's spine. The note was real, tangible proof of a meeting that the landlord insisted could not have happened. The handwriting was careful, the message sincere. It was a gesture of friendship, a quiet invitation to connect. In the days that followed, the note became a source of comfort, a reminder that the world is full of mysteries waiting to be explored. The tenant began to feel less alone, more attuned to the subtle rhythms of the building. They listened to the stories of the other residents, learned the history of the place, and found beauty in its quiet corners. Sometimes, late at night, the tenant would imagine Thomas's voice echoing down the hallway, offering advice or sharing a laugh. They would remember his kindness, his familiarity, and the way he had made the unfamiliar feel like home. In time, the tenant came to accept the ambiguity of the encounter. Not every question has an answer, and not every mystery is meant to be solved. The building was old, its walls steeped in memory, and sometimes those memories linger just beyond the threshold of understanding. In the end, the tenant realized that what matters most is the connections we make, the kindness we share, the welcome we offer, and the stories we carry with us. Whether Thomas was real or imagined, his presence had made a difference. The new apartment was more than just a collection of rooms. It was a place where past and present intertwined, where every neighbor, every encounter, held the possibility of something extraordinary. And so, as the days turned into weeks, the tenants settled into their new home, embracing both its comforts and its mysteries. The note from Thomas remained tucked safely in a drawer, A quiet reminder that sometimes, the most remarkable welcomes come from the most unexpected places.